All right, so we are going to be covering a new topic. This is called the unit circle. And so it is important that you guys learn where the unit circle derives from, how we get all these values. Most of the stuff we've already covered before, but now we're just putting everything together. And so it's really important that you guys memorize how to use a unit circle. If you are planning to take calculus next year, you will be expected to memorize this unit circle. If you are going into anything in the medical field, if you're going into business, if you're going anything to engineering or anything that has to do with math, you will have to take a calculus class and it will be expected that you memorize this unit circle. Okay, so that's why we have to cover it. It's very important. So it tells us here, a unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1. So if you see here, they draw a circle on the coordinate plane, and your radius from here out to the end, your radius is going to be 1 unit. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this and let's see what we already know. So what we covered last week is where trig functions are positive and negative and in which quadrants. So we had covered this section already. All of your trig functions in the first quadrant will be positive. Okay, if we move on over to the second quadrant, only sine and its opposite are positive. Okay, your other 4 trig functions will be negative. If we look in our third quadrant, only tangent and cotangent are positive. Your other trig functions will be negative. In the fourth quadrant, only cosine and secant are positive. The rest are going to be negative. Okay, so that's something that we already learned. What we also learned is how to label or how to number our lines on here. So we start off with 0 degrees, which in terms of pi or in radians is 0 pi, or just 0. Then we go here, this is halfway to the 90 degrees, which half of 90 is 45 degrees. In radians, that is pi over 4. Okay. Then we have up here is going to be 90 degrees, and in radians, that is pi over 2. Then we go ahead and cut that in half. That would be 135 degrees. So 90 plus another 45 degrees is 135. And in radians, that's going to be 3 pi over 4. And so this is 180. And in terms of radians, that is pi. And then we add another 45 degrees, which gives us 225. And in radians, that's 5 pi over 4. And down here, we have 3 pi over 2. And in degrees, that is 270 degrees. We have plus another 45 degrees would give you 315 degrees. And that is 7 pi over 4. And then we complete one full circle, which is 360 degrees. And in radians, that is considered 2 pi. Okay. So we know almost everything in the unit circle. The only part that is new is the coordinates that I have here and the sine and cosine stuff that I have here, which we're going to go over, and that's what I'm going to be explaining. Now, we did say that our unit circle is a radius of 1. That is why this point right here is 1, 0. Okay. If we move up here, this point over here is going to be 0. Your x value is 0 and your y value is 1. Okay, we all know how to name coordinates. That came from algebra 1 maybe, is how to plot points. So this point, if our radius is 1, then this point would be -1 because your x values on this side are negative, and then your y value is 0. And then last down here, we have 0, -1. So your x value is 0 and your y value is -1. So pretty much you guys know most of this stuff already, okay? The only parts that are new are the parts that I don't have highlighted. And that's what we are going to be going over. Okay, so just a little refresher. This is also the same thing that we've been learning. We are adding the fact that your radius is 1 here. So for sine, we know that is our opposite or over our adjacent. Or the way we learned previously was our y value over our radius r. So our y value here divided by our radius 1 is just going to give you anything divided by 1 is itself. So wow. For cosecant, we have to flip that around so it becomes 1 over y. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that in yellow because I was doing all my sine and cosine yellow. So if we look here on my unit circle, you notice for my y values, I had written sine in here because your sine is your y value. Okay, so there's something that we learned, pretty simple. Your sine is always going to be your y value. So if I look here, let me minimize this. Sine. So anywhere where you see your y value, that is what your sine is equal to. So sine of 315 degrees is this number. Okay. Next, your cosine. So your cosine is your adjacent over your hypotenuse, or in terms of the axes, the way we have it on here is going to be your x value over your radius. Okay, your adjacent over your hypotenuse. So in this case, it is going to be x over 1. But remember, any number divided by 1 is just going to be that number. Okay, so that means that cosine of theta is equal to your x value. And your secant is the reciprocal, so it's going to be 1 over x. Okay, so that is why if you notice on my x values underneath it, on all my x values, I do have a cosine under there to remind me that cosine is my x values. Okay, so I have it here, here. And so we pretty much almost covered everything on this unit circle. Okay, we just have a little section we haven't covered just yet. And then I'll also show you how to apply it. All right, lastly is our tangent. Our tangent is our opposite over adjacent, or in terms when we put it on the coordinate plane, it's our y value over our x value. Okay, now our y and our x are just y over x. Nothing special about that. Y over x. And so then cotangent is going to be your x value divided by your y value. So to find tangent and cotangent, it is going to be a little bit of work. There's going to be a little bit of math. So our quadrantal angles, we covered them on here on our unit circle. So I'm going to go ahead and cover them on here. So this is going to be, let's see, 1, 0. This is 0, 1. Okay, this point is -1, 0. Your x values are negative over here. Here our x value is 0 and our y value is -1. And that's it. So they want us to rewrite this again. So 90 degrees is also known as pi over 2. And 90 degrees, which is up here, this number up here, that is 0, 1. So that's what I am going to write on here, 0, 1. At 180 degrees, my point is -1, 0. At 270, it's 0, -1. And then here, our point is at 0, 360, or 0 and 2 pi. It is 1, 0. So then we need to remember, our sine is our y value. Okay, in case you didn't remember, it's right here. Our sine we said was our y value. We also put it right here for every y value. We put it sine, as sine. So if we look here, oh, it keeps moving around. There. Okay, so sine is our y value. So at 90 degrees, sine of 90 degrees is equal to 1. Okay, because our y value here is 1. Here, our y value is 0. Here, our y value is -1. So sine of 270 is going to give you -1. Sine of 360 degrees or sine of 0 degrees is going to give you 0 because our y value is 0. Now cosine. Cosine is our x value. So if I look here, my x value was 0. So cosine of 90 degrees is equal to 0. Cosine of 180 degrees, my x value here is -1. So cosine of 180 degrees is -1. Cosine of 270 degrees, my x value here is 0. So this is going to be 0. And then cosine of 360 degrees or cosine of 0 degrees is equal to 4. All right. So now we're going to have to find tangent. So in order for us to find tangent, we're going to have to take our y value and divide it by our x value. So here, our y value we know is 1, and we are going to divide it by our x value, which we know is 0. So whenever you take 1 and you divide it by 0, that is going to give you undefined. I'm going to have to abbreviate it because it's not going to fit. All right, now let's look at the next one. So tangent of 180 degrees, okay? To find tangent, we have to take our y value. So at 180 degrees, our y value is 0, and our x value is -1. So when we do 0 divided by -1, that gives us 0. Okay, when the 0 is on top, it gives you 0. So then moving on to the next one, we are going to take our y value, which is -1, and we are going to divide it by our x value, which is 0. And remember, when you end up with the 0 on the denominators, you are unable to divide anything by 0. It gives you undefined. And then the last one, we have our y value is 0 divided by our x value is -1, and that is going to give us 0. Okay. Now we're going to do cosecant. Now remember, cosecant is a reciprocal function of sine. Okay, so I always remember this because cosecant and sine start with different letters. That's how I know they're opposite of each other. Okay, there's reciprocals of each other, so 1 over y. So then I am going to take 1, and I'm going to divide it by my y value. In this case, my y value is 1. So cosecant of 90 degrees gives us 1. All right, now for 180 degrees. My y value here, I'm going to take 1 and divide it by 0. Now remember, when you divide 1 by 0, it's not possible, so we have to write undefined. All right, now cosecant of 270 degrees. So we have to do 1 divided by our y value. In this case, our y value is -1. So when you take 1 and divide it by -1, it gives us -1. And then the last box, we have our 1 divided by our y value. And our y value here is 0. So 1 divided by 0 gives us undefined. All right, now we have secant. So secant is a reciprocal function to cosine. So we are going to do 1 over x. So we're going to take 1 and we're going to divide it by our x value. So on the first one, at 90 degrees, our x value is 0. So 1 divided by 0, remember you cannot divide anything by 0. That gives you undefined. Now we take here 1 and we divide it by our x value is -1. So 1 divided by -1 gives us -1. Next one, we have 1 divided by our x value. Our x value here is 0. So 1 divided by 0 gives us undefined. And then last, here we have 1 divided by our x value, which is 1, and that gives you positive. Okay, last is cotangent. So cotangent is a reciprocal function to tangent. So instead of doing y over x, we do x divided by y. So at 90 degrees, my point is 0, 1. So we take our x value, which is 0, and divide it by our y value, which is 1. Oh, sorry. So our x value, which is 0, divided by our y value, which is 1. When we do 0 divided by 1, that gives us 0. Okay, moving on to the next one, we take our x value. So our x value here is -1. And we divide it by our y value. My y value is 0. So -1 divided by 0 gives us undefined. You cannot divide anything by 0. Okay, moving on to the next one. At 270 degrees, my x value is 0. My y value is -1. So 0 divided by -1 is going to give me 0. And then the last is going to be my 360 degrees. So my x value here is 1, and my y value here is 0. So 1 divided by 0 is going to give me undefined. You cannot split anything into 0 groups. It's not possible. So that's why you cannot divide by 0. Okay? It is impossible, undefined. So those are our quadrantal angles. Now moving on to our other type of special angle that we're going to cover today, which is our 45, 45, 90 triangle. So if you remember back from geometry, when you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle, these are x, 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 and the square root of 2. So when that happens, on our unit circle, our radius is 1. So that means that this is an x in the square root of 2. Oh, it's not working. X in the square root of 2. Okay, so that means x in the square root of 2 is equal to 1. And this is back from geometry. You guys learned this in geometry. We also covered it a little bit in pre-cal. And so in order for us to solve for x, we're going to have to get rid of the square root of 2. And the way we do so is by dividing by the square root of 2. Okay, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. This cancels out, and we get x equals 1 divided by the square root of 2. Now, on here, we cannot leave it as just 1 divided by the square root of 2. We have to rationalize this. And what that means is we have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2 in order for us to get rid of that square root on the bottom. That means we are left with the square root of 2 over 2. Okay? That means the distance from here to here is going to be the square root of 2 over 2. Okay? And also right here, the square root of 2 over 2. They should be the exact same thing. So if this is my x value and this is my y value, that is why I have right here the square root of 2 over 2. Is your x, and then the square root of 2 over 2 is your y value. So referring back to the unit circle that I had created here, if you notice on all of these, we have the square root of 2 over 2 on every single one of them. But what changes is the sign of it. So here in the second quadrant, your x values are negative. Here in the third quadrant, both your x and your y values are negative. Here in the fourth quadrant, your x value is positive, but your y value is negative because you shift down. Okay, so we have already covered everything that we need to on the unit circle so far. So let's go ahead and finish covering these. So here we have what we already figured out is that our coordinate is the square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2 at 45 degrees. So then sine, remember sine is your y value, and cosine is your x value. I think I did this the wrong color, sorry. Sine and cosine. Okay, so here it says sine of 45 degrees. Well, we already know sine is your y value, so then that means that sine is equal to the square root of 2 over 2. We know cosine is your x value, so that means that it is the square root of 2 over 2. Tangent of 45 degrees. Tangent is your y value, which is the square root of 2 over 2, divided by your x value, which is also the square root of 2 over 2. So just going back to just regular basic math, for example, I'm just going to give you some samples. If you do 2 divided by 2, that's going to give you 1, right? You do 10 divided by 10, that's going to give you 1. So it doesn't matter what number it is. If it's the same number and you divide it with itself, it is always going to give you 1. So that is what this is equal to. This is equal to 1. So now let's work on the reciprocal functions. For cosecant, we're going to have to flip it around. So this is going to be 2 over the square root of 2. But remember, we cannot have a square root on the denominator. So we have to do something called rationalize. And that means that we have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. So then on the top, we get the 2 and the square root of 2. And then on the bottom, the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 gives us 2. Then these 2's cancel each other out, and all we're left with is the square root of 2. Okay, so that's cosecant of 45. Now for secant of 45, secant is the opposite of cosine, so we do have to do the reciprocal. So we have to flip it around, and it becomes 2 over the square root of 2. And then the same thing happens. So I'm not going to do all the work all over again. I know once I rationalize this is going to give me the square root of 2. And then finally, cotangent of 45 degrees. So cotangent is the opposite of tangent, so we have to flip it around. So we take our x value, the square root of 2 over 2, and we divide it by our y value, which is the exact same thing, the square root of 2 over 2. And so when this happens, you divide something by the same thing, it gives you 1. Okay, so moving on. It wants us to use the unit circle to evaluate the following. So the first one is asking us to find sine of 180 degrees. So we're going to refer to our unit circle. Here is 180 degrees. Our sine, I have it labeled, is 0. So that's what we're going to write here is 0. So this is what your quiz is going to look like. Okay, it's going to ask you something like this, and you're just going to give me the number. All right, here is cosecant of negative 180. So in case you don't remember, you can refer back to this. That's why it's important that you're taking notes. So cosecant is 1 divided by y. So I'm going to write this down. Cosecant is 1 divided by my y value. Now, it is negative 180 degrees, so when we refer to our unit circle, since it's a negative angle, we go in the reverse direction. Coincidentally, we do land in the same spot, and so on there, we're looking at the y value, which is 0. So when I solve for it, we're going to do 1 divided by 0. We need to remember anything divided by 0 is undefined. Okay, moving on to cosecant. Now we need to remember that cosecant is, again, the opposite of sine. So 1 divided by y. And so at 45, we're going to go ahead and check that out. All right, so here is this, at 45 degrees, it's the square root of 2 over 2. This is what I'm looking at right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put here 1 divided by the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, all we have to do is just flip that around, and it becomes 2 over the square root of 2. And then the same thing happens here. We can't have a square root on the bottom, so we need to rationalize it. So that means we need to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. Okay, and that gives us 2 in the square root of 2 over 2. And so we end up with the same thing that we had in the previous problem. These cancel out, and all we're left with is the square root of 2. Okay, the next one is cotangent of 90 degrees. Now remember, cotangent is the opposite of tangent, so it is your x value divided by your y value. What do I want to write? Okay, so we're looking at 90 degrees, so I go to my unit circle, I find 90 degrees. So on here, I'm going to have to take my x value, which is 0, and divide it by my y value, which is 1. So I'm going to do 0 divided by 1. And so 0 divided by 1 is 0. All right, moving on to the next one, tangent of 0. We're going to take our y value and divide it by our x value. So we go up to our unit circle, and we check out at 0 degrees. We're looking at these points, and we're going to take our y value, which is 0, and divide it by our x value. So it is going to be 0 divided by 1, which gives you 0. And then lastly, we have tangent of 3 pi over 4. So we locate 3 pi over 4. So let's see, 3 pi over 4 is right here. Here is 3 pi over 4. So we're going to take our y value and divide it by our x value. Okay. So on here, our y value is, I forgot to write it down, the square root of 2 over 2. And our x value is the negative square root of 2 over 2. So be careful that you do not forget the sign. Okay, so then when you take a positive and divide it by a negative, it's going to give you a negative. And then when you divide something by itself, it is going to give you 1. Okay. So that completes this one. We'll go ahead and finish up the rest of the circle in the next lesson, but I'm going to go ahead and quiz you, and it's going to be very similar to what we did here. Make sure you take a screenshot of the unit circle or go ahead and copy it down because you do need the unit circle to answer these questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comments, or you can also send me an email. Thank you guys. Bye.